On behalf of the Louisiana Center for the Book in the State Library of Louisiana, thank you for joining us for this virtual celebration of Black History Month. Speaking today is Dr. Phebe A. Hayes and Ann Dobie. Since retiring from academia in 2013, Dr. Phebe A. Hayes has devoted herself to uncovering the hidden histories of African Americans in Louisiana. In 2018, she founded a nonprofit organization, the Iberia African American Historical Society, the mission of which is to research, teach, and commemorate the true and inclusive history of Iberia Parish. As president of the society, she successfully submitted applications for state historic markers to the Louisiana Office of Tourism that highlight significant minority individuals and events in Iberia Parish. Dr. Hayes' essays have been published in 64 parishes and Acadiana Profile magazine, and she has written reviews and forewords for many other historians. She is currently preparing manuscripts for publication about the history of African Americans in Iberia Parish. Ann Dobie is Professor Emerita of English at the University of Louisiana Lafayette, where she directed graduate studies in rhetoric and the university's Writing Across the Curriculum program. She also has directed a summer institute at the University of Vermont and worked with the Malta Writing Program in Valletta, Malta. In 2002, she chaired the One Book, One City program Lafayette Reads Ernest Gaines. She is the author or co-author of 14 books, compiler and editor of 3 literary anthologies, and the author of numerous articles on literature and composition. For 13 years, she served as founder and director of the National Writing Project of Acadiana. She is currently serving as editor for the literature section of NOLA, an online encyclopedia of Louisiana history and culture sponsored by the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Phebe A. Hayes.
Okay, so first what I'd like to do is to thank the Louisiana Center for the Book in the State Library for hosting this event in honor or in celebration of Black History Month. And I really want to thank Dr. Ann Dobie for inviting me to participate in this project with her. She's someone that I've admired for a long time. We were colleagues at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. And it's interesting that we both have some of the same interests, which is uncovering hidden histories and making sure communities know that history. So one of the things that the purpose of or the goal of my presentation is to talk about the parallels between what I do in Iberia Parish since retirement and what Dr. Dobie has done with her book. My passion since I retired from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette in 2013 has been to uncover the hidden history of African Americans in my home community. It's not just to uncover their history or histories, but it's also to humanize my people, especially from the 19th century to the early 20th century. A lot of that history is lost. People tend to not understand who the African Americans were. They don't know that we had African Americans who served in the state legislature from Iberia Parish, by the way. They don't know what role the Civil War played in Iberia Parish in the freedom of the people who were enslaved on those plantations, and how so many of them, including my ancestors, walked away from those plantations with the Union Army when the Union Army occupied Iberia Parish. So there's a lot of history to be uncovered. And anytime anyone is interested in uncovering the history, be it the 19th, early 20th century, like I have been doing in Iberia, or looking at authors, writers, especially women writers, I support that endeavor. And I'm very grateful that Dr. Dobie asked me to participate in this. How is my research connected to what Dr. Dobie has done in her book? First of all, in talking to her, she really got me excited when she told me that in her research, we have to go into the literature to decide, or to locate, what is worthy of being researched. But in her research, she had not found many books or any books that was a compilation or a collection of Black women writers of Louisiana. And that kind of, it struck me because it's insane that her book is the first, of that type. We know a lot, I think, about some of these women who she is focusing on, but looking at them as part of a collection, understanding the connections between these ladies from the 19th to the 20th century is something that has not been done before. I said in some of my notes that these ladies are connected through time and place. And even with my research, these women, a lot of them have connections to New Orleans. Of course, all of them are Louisiana based in some way, but a lot of them have connections to New Orleans when it comes to place. The historically Black universities of Louisiana figure prominently in their residency, their academic residencies, and that includes as early as Straight University, Southern University, Xavier, which is my undergraduate alma mater, Dillard University. There are connections, and I'd like to take the opportunity before I forget to show how what I have been doing in terms of studying some African American families from Iberia has a direct connection to some of these stories, some of these women that Dr. Dobie has been studying. The Wakefield family of Iberia Parish, we all know about because we've discovered through the research of New Orleans historians like Jarry Honore, through my own research, that the Wakefield, Emma Wakefield was the first woman to actually graduate from a medical school in Louisiana. She first started at Straight University, and all of her siblings attended Straight. Now, what's interesting is her dad, Samuel Wakefield, was one of the original trustees of Straight when it was founded. And then we have people like Alice Ruth Monroe Dunbar-Nelson, that's a mouthful, who went to Straight. And I often wonder whether or not their paths crossed with some of the people from Iberia that I have been studying. I know that the children, the sisters of Dr. Emma Wakefield, were in school at the same time with her. And I can only imagine conversations that they might have had. And again, there are other similarities. Alice Ruth Moore Dunbar-Nelson was from Acadiana. And like the Wakefield, not only was she from Acadiana, but she was mixed race, like this family was. So I think there are parallels that kind of captured my attention when I first heard about this particular research. Sybil Kein was another writer that I was interested in because she actually is descended from Miss Nelson, and she also wrote a lot about New Orleans, Louisiana, as several of these ladies did. New Orleans captures the imagination and the passion of so many of these writers. Just like Iberia Parish has captured my imagination and my passion. I love this particular community. And my mission is to tell the story of people whose voices are lost. The only thing people know about Blacks, especially in the 19th century and early to mid 20th century, is that most of them were descended from West Africans who were enslaved on plantations in this area. And that's not right. There were so many people who made so many contributions to this community. And it's my wish to contextualize my people and my community within the history of United States history. So having said that, I often wonder, because I always loved history, even though my degrees are in communicative disorders and sciences. But having said that, I often wondered, how did the Civil War, for example, unfold in Iberia Parish? How did it affect these people, these men and women, and these women that Dr. Dobie has written about, their families who had been enslaved at the time? And a lot of my information, insights, came from pension records that I received from my ancestors who were veterans of the Union Army and the Union Navy. When the Union Army came to Iberia, and I knew about it, but I only knew how it impacted white families, like the Weeks family of the Shadows. I didn't know it impacted my people. But when they came, my people, the African Americans, the West Africans who were enslaved in those plantations, they left with them. They went to what we call Morgan City, to what were called contraband camps. And the young men joined the Union Army or the Union Navy, as one of my ancestral grandfathers did as a child. And it's just amazing how they found the courage to walk away from everything they knew. Because remember, they could not, their whole world was whatever plantation they were enslaved on. It's the idea that, okay, so if you're enslaved in Foss Point around Laurelville, you're very rarely probably not going to have an opportunity to find out what's happening in, I don't know, Patchouville, on the Patchouville plantations, unless you were purchased by the Patchou family. So these families stepped out in faith and they sought their own freedom and they went with the Union Army. Same thing with Reconstruction. These are people who, after those young men returned, those who were alive, they returned from the Civil War. They became the community leaders. They established historically Black communities. And that to me is an awesome story that I have been trying to tell in Iberia. So many of them became, thanks to that 1868 state constitution, so many of them became Reconstruction era politicians, public servants. For example, Emma's father, who I told you had been a trustee at Strait University, he ran for and won the election in 1868, I think it is, to become a state senator representing Iberia Parish. Now, there were some problems, as there were many problems during Reconstruction, but there were so many Blacks who took control of the leadership positions in their communities. They wrote the most progressive state constitution of the time. And again, you would think that that's something that I would have learned as a child in the schools when they covered Reconstruction, but the reality is they didn't cover that part of Reconstruction. The only thing I ever learned about Reconstruction is that it was a horrible time. And it really wasn't. There were some exciting, progressive things that were happening. Now, of course, a lot of that was reversed with the coming of Jim Crow segregation and the codes that were meant to hold Black citizens back, hold them down. But it's important, I think, for us to study the history of our region within the context of how U.S. history unfolded, how it unfolded in Louisiana, and in my case, in Iberia Parish. The ladies that Ann focuses on, they were also impacted by those who lived in the 19th century, those who lived during Jim Crow, which most of them did. They were all impacted by a lot of these histories that I've been talking about. And so if we can just start studying their lives, we can get some insight into how they survived. Why was their creativity not squashed? You know, it's always interesting to me that you could find such creativity. These women, some of them, they wrote across a variety of genres. How did they find the strength or the courage to continue to express their feelings and their experiences in the written language? So, but I mean, that's one of the things that intrigued me about what Ann has done, you know, with her work. It's another, I'm really anxious to find out if we had any women writers from Iberia Parish. Doesn't mean that we didn't, right? What I think it means is that their record has not surfaced. And it's still up to us to uncover, you know, who these people were. Because we had people who were very bright, very gifted, but a lot of their records have been hidden. So even if I don't find it, hopefully the work that we have started in Iberia will continue as we move forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Phoebe. That was great. I love the term hidden histories.
that you use, because that's really what we're after. We're looking for those stories that have been overlooked or have been forgotten. And I agree that there are many parallels between the work you do and the little bit that I've managed to do. Well, thanks to everybody who's joining us on this broadcast. I don't know how interested you are in Louisiana literature, but I have been interested for a long time. The first book I read, I think, after moving to Louisiana many years ago was by Shirley Ann Grau, The Hard Blue Sky. And after I finished reading it, I said, who are these people? What is this culture? It was like meeting a foreign world. And although it was written by a woman, I realized that as I continued to read, most of the books that were published were by men. And if fewer books were published by women, even fewer were published by women of color. And then I discovered that many of these women had won prestigious prizes and honors from all across the country. And yet the people in their own state didn't seem to know their names. They weren't talked about at book clubs. They weren't talked about across the bridge table. And I began to wonder why. And of course, that's where the idea for the book came, because I found such talent and I wanted these women, these remarkable women, to be read and to be talked about and to be celebrated. So I'm going to talk about 3 of them today. There are more in my book, which looks like this. And all of their stories to me are fascinating. The first one, Phoebe's already mentioned, Alice Ruth Moore Dunbar-Nelson, a woman who had almost as many names as she had professions. So get ready. She was a newspaper columnist. She was a poet. She was a campaign advisor. She was a political activist. She was a stenographer, an executive secretary. You name it, she was it. It was amazing what this woman did. On top of that, she married 3 times, and she had numerous amorous relationships with both men and women. So she was a remarkable woman, and amazing what she got away with. Now, I'm not going to say too much about her because there's a new book out about her by Tara Green, and it's called Love, Activism, and the Respectable Life of Alice Dunbar-Nelson. Tara Green will be sponsored by the Center for the Book and the State Library of Louisiana during Women's History Month, and she will be speaking about Alice Ruth Moore Dunbar-Nelson. And so I don't want to steal her thunder, but I do highly recommend that you read her biography. You will be fascinated by what this woman got into, and also to hear Tara Green's talk, if possible. The second one I would like to speak a little more extensively about, Phoebe also mentioned, and that is Sybil Kein. She too had a number of different names. She goes sometimes by the name of Consuela Marie Moore or Consuela Provost. And maybe that's appropriate since she is a direct descendant of Alice Dunbar-Nelson. But her mission is entirely different. Sybil Kein is interested in the promotion of and the sustainment of what she calls Creolite. She wants Creole culture to be maintained, and she works to introduce new audiences to it. She has a very broad definition of what the word Creole means. She says it applies to any person of Spanish or French descent, black or white, born in the state of Louisiana, who subscribes to the customs and rituals of the Creole culture. In one of her really early books called Gumbo People, she says, surviving Creoles are those, quote, of mixed ethnic makeup who adhere to the inherited rituals, social customs, and who are native to the state. Now, her writing is her principal means of promoting Creolite. She writes about the importance of the Creole language and its history, and she gets her information from a multiplicity of places, from songs, from rituals, from recipes, from stories that she has heard told, and she sets them down in a variety of ways, principally in her poetry. but she also has other means of communicating with the public. She talks about a variety of subjects in her poems. She describes the Old South, which I assure you bears no relationship whatsoever to Gone with the Wind. She talks about the atrocities of slavery. She talks about the state of the American South. And in one of her poems, which is, I think, her most severe indictment of racism, in a poem called An American South with the subtitle Louisiana. It's kind of hard to take, I'll warn you. But the first stanza is really very lovely. She talks about the beauties of Louisiana. It goes, banana plantation, crepe myrtle in pink beauty, palmettos bracing clear sky, morning bright with mockingbirds. But then in the second stanza, it turns dark. All this of a spring to cache memory of chain, bloody hunks of hair, flesh turned with earth for planting sweet peas, bodies of babes wrung limp and plowed under, eyes, ears, hands rotting in the sun, genius crushed by law. Powerful stuff. Her example of individual people is certainly notable in her poems about Marie-Thérèse Metier, whom you may know better by the name that she went by, which was Quanquan. She was born into slavery, and her freedom was bought by a man named Thomas Pierre Metier, with whom she had 10 children. That was in addition to the 5 she had already had. And she established, after the Civil War, a kind of community of cultured, successful, free people of color. She was able to do that because after the war was over, she began to manufacture medicine, and she planted tobacco, and she hunted bears for their skins to be traded in New Orleans. This was some woman, remember, 10 children and doing all of this. And this allowed her to amass a considerable amount of property and money. Now, she owned slaves, but they were bought principally to prevent other purchasers from buying them. And so she ended up creating this community along the Cane River, just south of Natchitoches. Its history is fascinating, and books have been written about it too. Well, one of the poems that Sybil Kein writes about her goes like this. You were finally free, and you bought your children, grandchildren, and you meant not only freedom, but land, money. But the poem ends, why do I pick and gouge frantically at your bones, these Natchitoches riolettes? Am I still looking for my proud grandmother, sister, who is called Marie-Thérèse? Or does my soul like grieving in this fevered mud? So again, the poem turns deadly serious. Kein's efforts to promote Creolite do not end with her poetry. Shortly before Katrina hit, she published several influential books. One is called Bonjour Creole et là-bas, Learn to Speak Louisiana French Creole, an introduction. It complements her Mama's Creole ABC book, Pour les Petites, for children. She's the author of 9 plays, including an historical review with music, a pretty amazing productivity. Now, in addition to the written word, she also uses music to communicate. She holds a degree in violin and viola performance from Xavier University, and she once auditioned for the New Orleans Symphony Orchestra. She was rejected because at that time, all the symphony members were white. After that rejection, she turned to early Louisiana songs and she started recording them and performing them. And she still performs today with her daughter and with her brothers who are active in the New Orleans music scene. And they perform appropriately under the title of Creole Troubadours. So I think clearly Sybil Kein is a force for cultural preservation through her poems and her music and her knowledge of history and culture. she works to sustain Creole life. Now, the third person that I'm going to talk about, some of you probably know, maybe you even studied with her. That is Pinkie Gordon Lane. I would say that Pinkie Gordon Lane is the quintessential trailblazer. Her list of firsts is long and admirable. She was the first African-American woman to graduate with a PhD from LSU. She was the first woman to head the English department at Southern University. And Buddy Romer appointed her as the first person of color to serve as Poet Laureate of Louisiana. That's a pretty amazing record, but that's just for starters. Along the way to these achievements, Pinkie Gordon Lane taught in high schools in Georgia and Florida until she accepted an offer to teach at Leland College in Baker, Louisiana, then moved on to LSU, where she finished out her career. In her early days at LSU, she was teaching in the daytime, and then she would drive across town to go to LSU and take her own courses. And she wrote a poem about that experience. I really like this poem because it's playful, it's it reveals herself. It's kind of funny, but it's absolutely true. So let me read it to you. She says, telephone unanswered, parties unserved, husband languishing flat, unnerved, friendships neglected, kisses left cold, laughter too much, too sudden, too bold, tears much too quickly, as quickly forgot, a child loved and wanted, but with prudence ungot, dust on the table, a kitten unmilked, loved but indulged, flowing loosely like silk, ethereally lost in the cold world of print, a drunken desire, incontinent, ideas my only reality, a slave in pursuit of the damn PhD. And anybody who's gone through that knows exactly what she means. Along with her teaching, Lane had planned to write short stories, but one day someone recommended a book by Gwendolyn Brooks called A Street in Bronzeville. Reading it, this book of poems by a Black woman, was a life-changing experience for her. It was like a light went off inside of her. And if that seems strange today, remember that in the early 1960s, there weren't very many Black culture courses or courses in Black literature. And so this came to her as a new idea of what was possible. And so she completely changed her direction and turned from writing fiction to writing poetry. Now, her poetry entered the world, as you can imagine, at a very tumultuous time. The civil rights movement was in full swing in the 60s and 70s. And much of the art and letters being produced by Black artists was full of anger, full of venom, about causes that they felt passionately and intensely about. Pinkie Gordon Lane's poems were not. They were quiet. And in fact, she heard the criticism, and she wrote a poem called, appropriately, A Quiet Poem. It says, I'll read better with glasses, I think. This is a quiet poem. Black people don't write many quiet poems because what we feel is not a quiet hurt. And not a quiet hurt does not call for muted tones. But I will write a poem full of sounds of small animals, some fluttering in thick leaves, a smear of color here and there, about the whispers of darkness, a gray wilderness of light, descending, touching, breathing. I will write a quiet poem immersed in shadows and mauve colors, and spots of white fading into deep tones of blue. This is a quiet evening, full of hushed singing, and light that has no ends, no breaking of the plains or brambles thrusting out. Now, this is not to say that she was not involved in the cause for equality. She certainly was. One of many examples is a letter that she wrote to the Baton Rouge Morning Advocate in response to an article that had the headline, "Writers Find Baton Rouge a Good Place to Live and Write." However, the reporter did not mention one Black writer. And so she pointed this out in her letter. And then she said, "We Black poets are also Baton Rouge writers, or don't we count?" Today, Pinkie Gordon Lane is widely remembered, but nowhere more so than in Baton Rouge. Students at Southern and at LSU have gone together to sponsor an annual writing contest in her name. And the students at Southern petitioned the administration to change the name of one of the buildings on campus, a building that had been named for a former governor who was a known racist and who participated in the lynching of some Sicilian immigrants. They changed the name to Pinkie Gordon Lane, a perfectly appropriate act on their part. It is a fitting tribute to a poet who never screamed, but who fought her own quiet and powerful fight. Well, the stories that these women tell in their poems and plays and fiction are sometimes funny, sometimes loving, often dark and gritty, marked as they are by the passion and imaginations of their tellers as they seek to uncover, just as Phebe has, the stories that have been forgotten and have been overlooked. Above all, they reek of authenticity. They eloquently depict the worlds these women have known. And for this, I think they are to be celebrated. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for our virtual celebration of Black History Month.